I'm Amy Pruitt.
I'm Lisa Dumas.
I teach Ayurveda and yoga.
I teach yoga. I'm a yoga therapist in training, and I offer transformational coaching. But that's just part of the story.
We're moms, daughters, wives, and friends. We're always learning, and we've both experienced healing by what we teach.
And the intention of this podcast is to offer you our favorite tools from the traditions and sciences that support us as we navigate the realities and stressors of modern life.
Each week, we'll share stories, answer your questions, and talk to others who inspire us.
Welcome to the Radiant Warrior Podcast.
Yoga and Ayurveda to reclaim a courageous heart.
I want every single person who talks to another person ever to listen to this episode.
Unless you are a hermit in a cave and never run into anybody, this is a good one for you.
This is a good one for anybody that is a human being. A couple of episodes ago, I talked about one of the therapists that took part in a recent retreat that I went on for couples in Mexico. Mary Campbell hosted it, and she's already been a guest on our show. And the other facilitator, the incredibly talented body-based therapist, Nicolai Grosell, agreed to be with us on this episode. And the conversation that we had was so rich. I feel like I want to listen to it about 20 times and take notes.
Mm-hmm. And I have decided I'm going to go back to therapy.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically letting us know that what we're in conflict with, what bothers us in our life, whether it be in our intimate relationships with our family members or our coworkers, it's unrecognized and unhealed stuff within us. And it is important to have somebody else's guidance when we're coming to those awarenesses, because it's easy not to know. We need somebody who's gifted to observe what we're saying and the actions that we're taking and be able to help us to remember what we're really reacting to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I so enjoyed this conversation, and he really gives his clients and speaking to us permission to feel the feelings and recognize where they're coming from and maybe where they originated, and not to push those down or away or hide them away, but to examine them and see what's there.
He's all about bringing consciousness to our patterns and move towards freeing ourselves, making lasting changes, and being able to just live with a more open heart. So we couldn't be more grateful to him for appearing on this episode, and we couldn't be more excited for you to hear it. Before we get to it, we have something exciting going on. We are making our way through the month of March. We're 2 days away from my birthday, by the way.
Ooh, happy birthday.
Thank you so much. There's something about the number 48 that I feel really excited about.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think I remember you telling me that you liked 48.
I did like 48.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to spending time with my family. On my birthday, I always get to spend the day doing all of my favorite things with my family. And so that will include a beautiful walk in nature somewhere. That will include some delicious food, all of my favorite things, and just being with the people that I love. That's all that I want for that day.
You really do up birthdays well, whether it's for yourself or for those around you. I really want to emulate that with how well you celebrate your birthday and others' birthdays.
Yeah, I've talked about that here before. I definitely can give my mom props for that, because she made a big deal of our birthdays. I mean, it wasn't lavish or anything. It was very simple, but we felt special on that day. We felt like she was so happy that we were born. And so I do feel special, especially even when it comes to March. March, where I live, there's crocuses and daffodils and tulips blooming. And I have those memories of when I was a kid, walking home from school in the sunshine and seeing all the new blooms. So just March in general, I absolutely love as a birthday month. And this March, you and I have something that we've created that we want to share, because we're just a few weeks away from the official beginning of spring. Even if it doesn't feel quite like spring where you are, it's coming. It is coming. It's officially here on March 22nd. And Amy and I run this beautiful seasonal yoga and Ayurveda program called A Radiant Year. And we offer 12-week seasonal programs as a part of it. Every time the seasons change, our practices really can change in order to help us feel the best we can during the transition season. And so there's some specific ways that we invite you to think about spring and some specific things that we can do to feel our best. As an Ayurvedic counselor, maybe let people know what's going on this time of year, Amy.
Yeah, in Ayurveda, this time of the year, we're moving into what's called Kapha season, Kapha. And it's late winter, early spring. That's the season for Kapha. And it's the time when the snow melts and it can be rainy and muddy. And Kapha is made up of earth and water. And Kapha qualities of this time of year can feel heavy or inert or cool or damp. And so you can see those qualities outside in nature, but you also might begin to feel those qualities in your body and in your mind. And so in Ayurveda and in yoga, we change up our practices a little bit to balance those qualities, to bring in more warmth, more mobility, to shake off that inertia or that stagnation, and to really begin to embrace spring and not feel so down and lethargic.
Mm-hmm. Our community that is a part of A Radiant Winter, which just closed a couple of weeks ago, have been receiving a video from us every single Sunday morning that includes different practices. It's completely different each week, and the practices build on one another because it's our hope by the end of the season, by the end of 12 weeks with us, that you have created your own toolbox of practices, including movement and breath techniques and recipes, lifestyle options, specific meditations, specific mudras. I mean, it's really rich content that we're putting together, and our communities receive that once a week. There's a video class. There is downloadable material that accompanies the class, some inquiries, some journaling, things to practice and think about through the week. But we also keep it really simple because we know you're busy and we don't want to overwhelm. It's meant to be inspiring, and it's meant to support you in this transition season between winter and summer. And we get going again with A Radiant Spring just after the official beginning of spring. So the first class will be delivered on Sunday, March 22nd. I believe that's the Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Could
Yep.
be that it's, yes. And if you want to find out more, then please go to aradiantyear.com, and it'll have all the information that you want. And if you're curious about it, feel free to reach out to us as well.
Yes, we would love to see you inside A Radiant Spring.
And now, without further ado, this incredible interview with this wise and gifted body based therapist, Nicolai Grosell. Nicolai, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, I spent almost an entire podcast talking about a recent retreat that you were one of the facilitators on. It was so incredible for my partner and I to learn from you. And one thing that I want to share with our listeners is before your work as a therapist, you were actually a fashion photographer. And
Right.
what I want to ask about that is I wonder if your skill set in that vocation supports you in your work as a therapist who focuses on couples, because what I noticed about you is you just saw, you had this beautiful vision of what was really going on. And I wonder if your eye for the art that you were creating supports the eye that you have when you're working with people.
You know, in many ways it does. It was never really anything I thought about when I was shooting, but I definitely recognized it when I start working with people, because I shot a lot of fashion and a lot of portrait celebrity stuff. And you know, when you work with a subject, it's like you're always kind of looking to try to connect with the person behind the face, so to speak. So, you know, I would usually not interview the person I was working with, but I would sit with them and talk to them just candidly about whatever was going on in their lives, and just kind of looking at them while we were talking, and just to kind of get them to melt a little bit and kind of, relax, I guess, and fall into it. And when I started working with clients, I realized that I was actually using the same techniques. It's just kind of like monitor what's going on, and then because when you connect with another human being, then the actual picture taking becomes very simple, because that's really just recording the moment. But it's like, how do you build the rapport in such a way that they feel comfortable, and so yeah, in many ways there's a similarity. And you're working with people. I work with people every day as a photographer, and I do the same thing in my practice. So it's a little bit different, because it's less of a two-way conversation as a therapist, where photography, it's kind of a, you're an open book. You talk about whatever's going on. But yes.
Yeah, I wondered about that. You definitely have a gift for cutting right through to the heart of the issue.
So what did therapy offer to you that made you know you wanted to learn to hold space in that way for others?
So back in like 97 or 98, I went, through a personal crisis, so to speak, or I went through a situation where I needed some support, and I tried traditional talk therapy, and, because I'm a very energetic person and do a lot of, exercise and outside stuff and in nature. And I felt this whole idea about sitting in a couch and just talk to somebody. I was like, well, it doesn't really, I get certain understanding about what's going on with me, but I don't feel any different. So then somebody suggested to do what back then was called, it still is, but it's called core energetics, which is a body-based modality. And I went into this guy's office, and he actually was a really interesting guy. He lost his one arm in a climbing accident, so he has a hook. So one arm is an arm, and the other one is a hook. And he's this very good-looking guy, and we talked for a very short time. And the next thing he did, he took up a punching shield, and he gave me a pair of punching gloves on. And he said, "Look, now you just come over here and beat me up a little bit." And I was like looking at, and I'm 6'2", so, and he was, at least a foot shorter than I am, and I just went to town on it, and he was just holding the space for me, and so it really it gave me what I needed, which was the feeling in my body, like this, because I had a lot of aggression. My dad and I had a compromised relationship, so I had a lot of aggression in my body that I wasn't really in contact with. And then through almost a 10-year stretch, I worked with him for almost 10 years. I would do these long stretches, months, every week for months, and just work my body. We would find a topic to talk about, and then very quickly it became a very physical experience. And that was kind of how I started it. And then when I, back about 15 so years ago, I wanted to learn something different, because I've only ever shot pictures. I picked up a camera at 15 and just started taking pictures. And I was like, I want to learn something different. I want to get a new skill. And I was getting a little burned out on the photography, to travel, the heavy equipment. And, so I was like, well, I really love this work, and I really love what it had done for me. It completely changed me as a person. And that was what segued me into go back to school and then become a therapist myself. So.
Wow, that's so incredible. And you learned that the body needed to be included, that there's so much more than what can come out through talk therapy. Can you say a little bit more about body-based therapy and why that's important?
Yeah, I actually think it's the health crisis that we experience on a global level right now has everything to do with the fact that modern medicine doesn't really take the body into consideration. It's a very problem-based, modality or approach, meaning you have an issue, we'll fix your issue, but we're not really looking at what is the originator of the issue. And when you have a trauma, you have, and I just want to clarify that trauma sits in the body the second that a sense of hopelessness shows up, so you can imagine you're in the airport and you can't find your gate and you're about to miss your plane. And if you have a sense of hopelessness just right there, well, that actually classifies as a trauma, because it's the way the body responds to it. And there are two pieces to a trauma. There's the physical part of it, which is how you feel. And then there's the cognitive piece of it, which is the story of it, like what actually happened. And traditionally, in a traditional talk therapy, you deal with how do you experience what's the story, what happened to you, what's the betrayal, what's the, whatever happened. But you don't really address the physical aspect of it, which means that often people in other modalities will get a lot of understanding of why they feel the way they feel, and then they're let loose. They leave the office, and they're still feeling all these feelings. And very often I have had people come into my office, they're actually more angry because now they know why they're angry, and they can't do anything about it because, aggression is one of those emotions in our modern society that is not really promoted as being a healthy emotion. You can't really be angry, right? Like angry is something you do sporadically in an explosive fashion, or then otherwise you suppress it. And through that comes all the dysfunctions that we think of, like, domestic violence, road rage, addictions, all that stuff shows up because aggression is a life force energy, really. It's what brings us forth, which means we can't stop it. You look at what's happened. Religions has tried to stop it, or politics have tried to stop it, and nobody succeeds because you can't stop that energy. It's just way too potent. So in our therapy, we actually give the client permission to have that emotion, so we do a lot of that kind of energy, and it's very, everybody has it, everybody. So.
Well, the big aha for me, and I may have said this to you, Amy, on that podcast when I was talking about what Nicolai was sharing, just the way you put it. You were saying, have the emotion, get angry, but know what you're getting angry about. And typically what we're doing in our day-to-day lives is we have this anger in us based on something that happened earlier in our lives. And I want to highlight what you said, trauma is the moment when something happened and we had a sense of hopelessness. Like, wow, I think everybody could really look back at all of the times that we felt that. But your point is feel the emotion, but know what you're actually angry at, and then to explore healthy ways to get angry rather than exploding on another person and destroying their boundaries and harming and creating trauma in the relationship.
Exactly. And one of the most important pieces that I teach my clients is that it's, I can argue a point where any emotion you have is the right one to have, even to the most extreme situations. It's like there is a time when that emotion is the right one. Like if somebody is trying to hurt my family, will I go to any length to stop it? Of course I will. Even to the most extreme length, I will go to that. So one of the ways that I kind of, I use a lot of like illustration to teach people. One of the illustration I use is that if you have like a shelf and it's full of bottles, and every single bottle is one emotion. And you're watching the shelf and you go and pick your emotion, meaning I want to feel happy. So you take the happy vial. I want to feel angry. Well, you take the anger vial. What that illustrates and really helps people to do is to know that none of their emotions are not to be had, but they are they have the power to choose, which means, I can choose to get angry. I can choose to be happy. That's a daily choice, and most people don't really understand that when you don't choose your emotion, you're leaving it up for whatever, which means you can get affected by whatever's around you, and it's like, so through this work, it's like you become somewhat neutralized in a way where if I need to get angry, I will get angry. And if I need to not get angry, well, then I won't get angry. Do I ever get caught in a situation where I lose my temper, I lose my cool? Of course, I'm human. But my recovery time, and my clients' recovery time back to a balanced state is much shorter because you go, okay, I lost my cool here. Let me take a breath. Let me, do whatever I need to do, get some support. And then you come back to you, and you're not a hostage the same way anymore. You're in charge of your emotions. So.
Nicolai, do you find that you need to really encourage your clients, or that they are resistant to feeling their emotions or expressing their emotions, that they might not think that the emotions that they're having are okay?
Well, yes. That's basically why everybody shows up in my offices, because they feel something that they can't connect with, and it's not like I would ever take you into my office and say, now get angry, right? And you go like, well, I don't really know how to do that. Like, that's not really, the approach is more of you come in and you talk about whatever is a topic in your life. And then all of a sudden, let's say you have had a betrayal, 15 years ago, and you start talking about that betrayal because that betrayal is important to you, and very quickly what you will notice in your body, your stomach will get tight, you might start curl your toes up, your breath gets short, you may even start like slightly hyperventilating because now you're getting charged up. Mm-hmm. And that's the energy that, instead of having you sitting in the couch being all charged up telling me about what's going on, I'll have you move the energy while you're telling me. Because the thing about it is that you can't dismantle an aggressive energy with anything but aggression. Meaning, if you're aggressive, then the only way that you'll ever be able to do that is to get into the story why you're aggressive, and then be aggressive with the story. Meaning, somebody's been betrayed, had a betrayal, is like if they get to feel the betrayal while they move energy, that's the resolution, because that's what the body wants. That's what happens when we have a traumatic situation is the body encapsulates the experience because it wants to remember as many details about it in case it happened to show up again in the future. That's the body's really smart like that. It's basically a fight or flight response, which they added another level to it, which is called to freeze. So it's fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe but it's basically what has saved us as a species. But it was designed as you're walking in the jungle and a saber-toothed tiger comes and you got like 0.3 seconds to figure out what to do. That's what they respond, which means your body becomes hypervigilant. All the blood is pulled into the muscles. Your brain stops working. Your adrenaline is pumped in because you're about to move very quickly, very fast, very far, but in a very short time. Mm-hmm. And what happens now is that we actually are staying in this state of, which is another thing I want to talk about as well, is what stress does. And this is where all the, all these things come in. So
it makes me also, there's so much in what you said, the last couple of questions that you've answered, but it makes me think of panic attacks. I've talked pretty openly on this podcast about that's my journey is recovering from disordered anxiety. And I almost felt like it was my body having some way of releasing all of the stored energy because I felt like I was in freeze for a lot of my life.
Right.
And I wasn't taking care of that. That energy had nowhere to go. And so it almost felt like the flavor of my particular anxiety attacks did feel like a discharge of energy.
Right.
So it's like my body was, as you've said, our bodies are always wanting to bring us back into homeostasis. And that was just my body's way of helping. And having seen it that way has actually been really healing for me because I felt like I was a prisoner in this body that I couldn't count on because I never knew when that was going to happen. But really, that was my body attempting to help me.
For you, what might have shortened the time that you had to deal with or be in this particular experience is if you were able to identify why you have panic attacks, and then you work the why while you're in the experience of it. And that would have shortened the experience, not the particular episode, but let's say you had panic attacks for, 2 years, right? Like you would have been able to shorten that down because your body wants to release the energy, but it needs to be met in the place you're, when you're in the feeling of it. And that, that's why the work that I do is so potent, and the processing time for most people are much shorter, is because the body just wants to release. It wants to go back to balance. And it's the second it gets permission, it goes back to balance. It's like, it's a beautifully orchestrated machine that way. It doesn't remember the same way the brain does. It just goes, there's a charge, you release the charge, and then you let it go. And then you're done, so to speak, right? I mean, it's not done just like that, but it's a shorter process. So.
I wish I would have had you and information like that. Back then there wasn't as much information about mental health. And so, those panic attacks went on for a long time, more than 2 years. And so now I'm kind of going back to do the work. But what it's making me think of is, if somebody had a trauma where they froze and what the body wanted to do is run, how would you have people run?
Well, I mean, you could have them run, but it's like, but the question is more like, what are you running from? You know what I mean? And so then if you sit with that for a little bit, then usually they will arise to the surface or come up to the surface. And then from that perspective, you'll be able to confront it, because remember, the feeling that you're having of something terrible about to happen is a historical experience, you know. So I actually tell my clients when they are in that space, I tell them, look at each corner of my office and make sure there's no tigers sitting there. And I actually physically have them turn around. And when they do that and they go, well, there's nothing here. And I go, okay, so then you have to acknowledge that you are having a historical experience, meaning it is a, you know, it's an old feeling. And when they realize that, they go, okay, well, then I can maybe go into the feeling a little bit more, because I'm feeling like the world is going to cave in on me, but I'm in this beautiful office, and the environment is a safe environment, you know. And again, we don't do this on session one. I mean, there's a lot of relationship building, and then they get into it, and that's when the release happens, the tears, the yelling and screaming, the movement, the stretching, you know. And we also do this with people that wants to maximize their experiences. I mean, somebody could come in and they have done something really amazing, but they can't celebrate it. Like, I have one of my clients as a writer, and he does popular, you know, TV series, and you guys have both seen some of them, but he has a very hard time celebrating it. Mm-hmm. And he's so brilliant, and we did a lot of work around own it, like really, really, and it was, you know, immense amount of tears that came out of just this person just starting to really breathe his brilliance, you know. But he was so shut down, and he was able to produce the brilliance, but he wasn't able to celebrate it. And you know, so it's not all, you know, bad, quote unquote, things that happen to people. It's really just about becoming fully alive. You know, it's the goal of the work is that the larger your container is, the more capacity you have to filter whatever comes at you, which means the strawberries are sweeter, the sun is brighter, you know, everything just becomes more heightened because you're more available. And that's really, at the end of the day, since we are here doing this life on this planet, then why not floor it, you know, maximize it out to the most capacity, and that's really what happens. So.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you speak more to stress?
I mean, it's something that I've actually as a fairly new information to me, but I just, you know, people have talked about stress, and everybody's stressed, and stress kills, and then just recently I was told, like, you know, through a class I took, like, what actually happens to the body in a stressful situation, and it's that we actually, you know, delete about 2 billion cells on a daily basis, and then we produce 2 billion new cells. So it's an ongoing, you know, elimination process, and in a 7-year span, every single cell in your body has been replaced. So you're literally another human being, like we're somebody else. So what happens when you're in a fight or flight, which is the experience of the saber-toothed tiger, the body stops producing new cells because it's conserving all the energy to get you out of harm's way, but it's for a very short amount of time. So since the society, or the way society is set up today, is that so many people live in a stressful environment or in a stressful situation, what actually happens is that the body thinks there's a tiger coming, so it's conserving energy, so it's pulling all the energy back, which means the cell production is either cut off or cut way down, because it takes energy and product to produce new cells. But you're still bleeding 2 billion cells at the other end, because that's a natural selection. So within a very short time, we're actually being hollowed out from the inside. And to me, that was such an eye-opener, because I was like, wow, you know. So basically, anytime I'm putting myself in something where I say, well, I have to do it, and I know that it's not putting me in a stressful situation, I also have to sign off on the fact that I'm actually in a process of draining myself out. And when that became clear to me, then that changed a lot of my everyday, you know, the way I do things every day, and the way I relate to things, is because it's like, if it's not really supporting, then I have to look at it. I mean, stress shows up, you know, but these prolonged stresses are the ones that are really scary. So, I mean, I think are really scary, and not much has been spoken about that. You kind of have to go and look for it. So, you know, that's a newer thing for me. But
we all have our day-to-day stressful situations. I've heard you say that, many of us feel hostage to that first initial emotion that is triggered just by a
Right.
day-to-day stressful situation or a conflict. So what might you do in the face of that now that you didn't do 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, so one of the things what really is apparent to me is that so the body we work with something called the body mind connection, and what that is the body your body doesn't really know the difference between what's actually happening right now or what's as a historical experience if it is backed by an emotion. So if you think about it like again a traumatic situation, then the body will encapsulate because it wants to remember. So the second it encapsulates something, let's say somebody has experienced something where there are an aspect of this experience that shows up in their everyday life, like they have to take the subway, for example, or they have to be amongst people, or they have to do something that reminds the body of the trauma. So now the body is on some level, some percentage, it's on alert because it's remembering that this particular situation in the past was dangerous. So let's be on alert. That's a fight or flight state. It might not be a full blown fight or flight, but it is at a certain level, it's a fight or flight. Well, then that's where the cell production in your body stops because your body's getting ready to fight off something. So when a client comes in and we work the historical pieces out, like whatever happened back then, that means that when the body goes back to a homeostasis, then it's no longer needing to remember what happened in the past because it's no longer scary, which means the stress factor goes down and the body will now produce, the accurate amount of cells that you need to, to live, to be healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of like all these things kind of dovetail into each other, and the string obviously become longer and longer the more you go into it, right? But that's one of the main pieces why that I've been really honing in on lately is that correlation between those things. So
How did you decide to focus on working with couples?
I don't just work with couples. I mean, the majority of my practice is actually is individuals. But I mean, the work with one person is really amazing, but with two people is even more amazing because now you have like more dynamics, and then I do groups too, and my goal in the future is definitely to run very large groups because the energy. I mean, to answer your question, the energy when there's more than one person in the room gets more than double. I mean, so because so you have four people in the room, everybody's pulling on everybody else. That means that the energy rises. I mean, that's a little bit what we experienced in Mexico over the week was that we got further and further and further and further into it because everybody was just getting inspired by each other and you saw people melt. I mean, I saw you guys melt right in front of my eyes, and it's just and it's just so beautiful. I mean, that's to me is just the most amazing thing when people's hearts just open up. It's just I get great satisfaction. I'm not gonna deny that, and see somebody that are on the way to separating to support them and actually see them make a turn and go, you know what, let's try something different. And it doesn't happen every time, but a fair amount of people actually, come out and end up living successful relationships, and it's satisfying, very satisfying. So.
When you're working with relationships, whether it be romantic relationships, heteronormative relationships, there's all sorts of relationships to be working with. Are you seeing patterns in the communication skills that cause breakdowns between people?
Yes, I mean, yeah, definitely. It's a larger question because in core we also work with something called character structures, which is there are 5 structures to it, and they're from about 3 months of pregnancy until about 7 years of age. Whatever happens in that time frame determines our personalities, but it also determines our bodies. So we can actually within an 85-90% range, I'll be able to tell you what any human being's major issues are just by looking at them, just the way their bodies develop. So that said, depending on what body types comes into my office, there are very particular ways they respond. But that's a huge topic. So, I'm happy to elaborate on a little bit, but it's a very big topic. But yes, you can, we actually come together as couples. Very often you'll see similar people being coupled up. It often happens, and we think we're choosing, but we are choosing, but we're more looking for a partner to work our issues out with. That's really what most relationships are, as far as I have come to understand it, is that it's a unconscious desire to work out issues, and we're finding a partner that's willing to take that ride with us.
Yeah, but we don't know we're doing it. That's
no.
That was such a huge aha moment for me, and that's what we talked about in the episode where we talked about you. Is that is the invitation in all of our relationships, is whatever is being triggered is the work that needs to be done.
That's the aerospace. I mean, that's why you chemically are actually induced for the first 3 or 4 months of a relationship, is because you're not if you were really there, then you wouldn't be there. Most people wouldn't be there. You know what I mean? So you're actually chemically changed. So you don't see. I mean, that's why they call it rose-colored glasses, because you are literally not seeing the world the way that it comes back to. But that's the whole point, is like that you have enough time invested into it, that when the real issues start to surface, you're already invested, and then most people tend to give it a shot, you know what I mean, and try to work it out, and so it's fascinating.
Okay, so couples listening, they may be in the rose-colored glasses time of a relationship, or in my experience and in many people that I've spoken to, when that starts to go away, so many conflicts arise, and there's language like you tricked me and you're different than you were. What are some techniques to think about when it comes to that stage in a relationship, when you're seeing things as they actually are and it's not what you thought?
Well, it's kind of like if you back into it a little bit. Let's say that you take a woman and she was betrayed by her father, right? He was absent, he wasn't there, whatever, something happened, right? And then she goes out in the world and she feels, and she never did any work about it. She never did any work around it. And then she goes out in the world and she falls in love with a guy, and everything's fine. And then all of a sudden he does, he says, honey, I'm going to be home at 8:00 for dinner. And then he gets caught. There's a traffic jam or an accident. He gets caught. His phone is not working. He comes home at 9:00, and she's red hot, right? She explodes on him, and he goes, but honey, I just was in a traffic jam. So he doesn't have a chance right there, because what she's working out is her dad, her dad's absence, her dad's betrayal. She has a bottom line or an underlying story saying men are untrustworthy. They don't stick around. They're just takers, whatever her story is, right? And she will scan the horizon for anything that proves her story. So in a situation like that, the only thing you can really do is and what I do is, when somebody comes in, and a couple comes in and start work I want to do, and they start out with a lot of, it's he always, he never, or she always, she never, and everybody's kind of, both parties are dug into a trench, and they're just kind of firing at each other. But the work is not really among the couple, in that sense. The work is to expose the back end of it. Meaning, if the husband of the wife, which father never showed up, if she was in my office, I would work her father. I would work her relationship with her father, and very quickly she would probably completely fall apart, because she's going to feel the terror of her husband, the terror from the father, but she's also going to feel the terror of her husband potentially leaving her and what that means to her. When he sees that changes everything, because now he has some understanding why she responds the way she responds. And the same thing goes for whatever his story is. We all come to the table with a story, right? We all have experienced something. So when you work the individual stories, then all of a sudden the language changes, right? Then that means that he will remember to be, to give her space, but not necessarily like if he walks through the door and she's exploding, give her 15 minutes or give her 10 minutes or just let her vent, because her terror is coming up. Like she's terrorized by this situation that the husband is triggering, but he has very little to do with. We work with something called the 80-20 rule, which is 80% of what you're experiencing at any given time is historical and 20% is real. Mm-hmm. Meaning you have a fight with your partner, 20% of the fight is actually about the dishes. The 80% is about something entirely different. And if you go into the relation and into the therapeutic process with that in mind, then it becomes very quickly very, exploratory, meaning both couples going, this is how I see it, or this is how I experiencing it. Let's see what's behind it. You know what I mean? Because you're there to work out the issue so you can get back to a loving experience. And as soon as the couples get that, it becomes really fun, because it's like, what else is here? Like it becomes, we trigger each other, but both parties are invested into it, meaning we're here to move the stuff out of the way so we can get back to what this is all about, being in a loving experience and have the support we need and to grow and all this stuff, right? So
I'm interested to know how, if they aren't in therapy with you, how they are identifying what's old and what's new.
Well, they're in most cases they're not. That's one of the reasons why the divorce rate, unfortunately, is as high as it is that it's easy to get ducked down in your belief or your story saying he is the reason, and then most people will split up and go and do it again, and often they'll have the same relationship over and over again because they're trying to work out the same issue, because the issue is the issue, right? Like whatever happened, and as long as it's stuck in your body and not released, well, it's stuck in your body. And so it's like that saying, wherever you go, there you are. It's like you can replace Mr. Right with any version of Mr. Right, but whatever relationship you have to men, you will still have to men, right? Hopefully, unfortunately, more and more people are realizing that there's more to it than a one-dimensional experience. It's like we're here to heal, our relationship with our parents, but also the generation of people that are alive right now are the most processed out people in ever, right? I mean, it's as far as going to therapy, which means that I've had people come into my office and they're fairly young, but they're actually working 2, 3, 4 generations of hurts out because the original betrayal happened, and then the next generation didn't do anything about it. They just passed it on. Mm-hmm. You see it very often with people being abusive, and then they end up in abusive relationships, and you kind of wonder, why would you choose abuse if you experience abuse? And the answer is simple. It's what you know. We're all drawn to what we know, even if it's dysfunctional. We'll go, you'll walk into the room, it's like there's a study done with people that grew up in alcoholic household, and they're way more likely to marry or get into a relationship with an alcoholic than people that didn't. And you would kind of go like, why is that? And it's like, because the person will walk into the room and there'll be 200 people in the room, and they'll sniff out the 10 alcoholics because they know what it looks like. They know what it feels like. I know that one. Okay, that feels safe. Let me go over there. So it's fascinating. So there isn't really any other way around it and work it out. There's many modalities you can try. But you got to get into the body. I mean, somatic therapy on a whole is exploding on the scene right now because everybody's realizing, it's in the body. It's like it's in the body.
And you have to find a way to come to these awarenesses. That's why therapists like you are so important, because if we don't know, if we're unconscious to our stories and the beliefs that we have, and as you say, we're just playing them out in all of our relationships, I can completely identify with that. I can, every relationship, there was the same challenge. There wasn't enough love for me in that relationship. And it, for me, it wasn't therapy. It is now. It was yoga and the philosophy behind that practice and that system that showed me that our thoughts are patterns, and it showed me the way of the mind. And then it showed me that, oh, well, maybe this entire story that I have about my life and about this human, maybe that's wrong. And uh, learning to dismantle that was so incredible, and learning that my thoughts could not really be trusted because they were coming from somewhere else. So
Right.
I just appreciate that we're talking about this more often, because it's a huge game changer, and I think it takes our whole lives to really unearth that 80% that you're talking about. And Nicolai, I mean, I hope that you're comfortable with this, but I'm curious regarding that 80/20 concept. You do, I know, a lot of your own personal work, which is why you're so gifted at holding space for other people. Can you give me some examples of what you've unearthed about your own 80% that supports you in your relationships right now?
My biggest teacher was definitely my father. I mean, he's still alive, and we have a very we have a balanced relationship today. But there's topics that we can't talk about. But I came to America in '93 with a suitcase and $4,000, and then I just started in a corner, and I just worked my ass off. I mean, literally, like, just plowed ahead, and I never really stopped. I never really stopped to think, why am I working so hard, and why do I want to be a photographer in this probably the hardest place in the world to be a photographer? I mean, of all cities, New York is the place to do it. And it wasn't until when I started therapy that and I did all this work with my dad that it came to me, through the process that he never acknowledged us. Like, he didn't matter what we did. I mean, I was on the Olympic team in archery, and I don't remember him ever saying a word about it or any of it. So it's like, what I was doing was I was trying to prove to my father through the work, right, through the immense amount of things I was doing, and so that was why I was never really able to celebrate. What happened was, because until he responded, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't enough. It wasn't loud enough. And and my sister, I mean, she's a very famous film producer, a big film producer in Europe, and same thing, she has the same exact story. Mm-hmm. And when I was able to bridge that, was the day that I probably took some time off. I don't remember, but I remember the moment when I was like, wow, this is insane. This is insane. Because I was in the process of, I mean, I was younger, and so I had a lot more, like, I could run harder and not pay the price for it, but I wouldn't have, I was a stressed out young man in New York, just, running 90 miles an hour to try to prove him, and when I let that go, that was when the relationship changed, because with him too, was because I had to stop caring, and when I look at him, he's an antique dealer in Europe, and he's done amazingly in his life. But if you ask him, there's no celebration in it, none whatsoever, because but he never did a day of therapy in his life, so he's a perfect example of what happened when the hurt just rolls from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. And and I mean, he's incapable of loving. I mean, he has 4 children, and the only person he's ever told he loved is his dog. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's comical today, but it was very hurtful and very sad for so many years. So that's one of the places where I can definitely say that I experienced it on myself. So.
Thank you for sharing, and we really learn from each other's stories.
I feel like I need to sign up for therapy immediately.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Because I still feel like there are multiple layers that can be addressed, and I have spent the majority of my adult life not examining my life, just plowing ahead and working harder, and I've been in therapy off and on, but I'm not currently in therapy, and I don't know why, because I find it so useful and so supportive and healing. And then there just seems to be periods of time where I, for one reason or another, I drop out of it, or the therapist moves away, or, for various reasons. And I really, just speaking to you today reminds me of the importance of giving yourself that time and space and having that examined existence.
Right.
To really, even if you're feeling great,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
and there's always another layer that could be examined. And especially when you were talking about stress in the body, I was just thinking about what an anti-aging process therapy could be.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely. Absolutely.
like just this rejuvenative process of going to therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've experienced it, and I've seen it in multiple people. That the second the body gets what it needs, it just bounces back. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thing is like the body. Our bodies are just there every day. They show up every day. And just does for us and does for us, and we treat it and like it's like a something we can just replace. A lot of us do, right? I mean, I have done, and it's like it just shows up until it doesn't, and then the show's over. But um, and it's like, so it's the second you give it what it needs, it just boom, it just comes right back, and it's like, okay, let's do it again, and it changed my relationship with myself in that sense, So
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask about specific emotions that, emotions like shame and self consciousness and emotions that hold people back in their lives. And because I have you on the line, I mean, I can't resist sharing something that I feel holds me back based on, I think I can put my finger on in the past what it was. And so I have this specific memory about standing in front of a group of people and being humiliated. And so in my life, I often have to stand in front of a group of people. And I am called to do the work that I do just a little bit more than I am to give in to the fear of history, because I know it's in the past and I know that in this moment I'm safe. And, I'm wanting to be connected to a greater purpose than, my own wounding. But for example, I think a lot of people feel like they want to hide who they really are, or, they have bouts of feeling self-conscious and nobody wants to be embarrassed. And I think that typically comes from something that happened in the past, because we just have this wiring, that we don't want to be exiled from the group. We have a need for belonging.
right.
What would the process be if it's not necessarily anger, but if we
Right.
had something in our past where we felt humiliated, like we wanted to hide, like a deep
Mm-hmm.
core wound of shame? What are
Right.
some thoughts you have about that?
I mean, the approach is somewhat the same. It's just the choice of tool is a little bit different. I mean, of course, if you feel shame, I'm not going to have you, hit something, or I may, because the hitting is not. I mean, we use, punching gloves or tennis rackets and these big foam cubes and our hands, and it's not like the moving of energy is not really always about aggression. It's about that we suppress our emotions with our physicalities, meaning you probably both have experienced something happens and your belly gets really tight, or your breath gets really short, or you tense up in some sense. I mean, like there's a way the body actually controls that. So what happens is when you move energy, like you just, we also do it with kicking, like we'll kick a big foam cube. And what happens is that when the body is drained for its physicality to withhold, then the emotions have more space to freely come around, and then they surface. And then guess what? Next time you're probably crying, or something's happening, right? So when you talk about shame, it's like of course that's a very soft feeling, and it's embarrassing, and you feel a lot of people feel annihilated, and they feel all sorts of things. So that's compassion. I mean, it's like that's me working the compassion piece, and it's like as a therapist, you kind of a little bit of a chameleon, because you, depending on who walks through your door, you have to become what they need. So I play the son or the father or the husband or the the dad, a lot of dad. Like I'm 50, so I play a lot of dad now. You know, I mean, I used to be the more of the partner or the the attraction was when I was younger, but now a lot of people it's dad stuff that comes in, and you just you again you create a container where that person can just feel the emotion, you feel the emotion, and when you do feel the emotion, it melts. It's a little bit like if you put an ice cube on your countertop. It's going to melt, but it's going to take a while, right? It's going to slowly just melt, and then those emotions are the same way. Like they're not going to go away overnight or right away, but if you give them space, then they will slowly come out. I mean, but those kind of feelings you have to be very gentle, because they're the first ones to go in hiding. Meaning, you'll put a layer on, and it's actually called a mask. You slap a mask on top of it and say, "This is not important." And so that's the gentle work, and I do a lot of gentle work. I work a lot with women that've been violated and in various ways, and that work is a mix of being firm and hold them to it, and then also be soft and create space that these terrible acts have happened, or I mean, a lot of dad stuff where the father wasn't available, or he died, or he's an asshole, or he's abusive, or and it's really about hold the space and whatever is needed. So it's a little hard to explain or to describe the those kind of feelings, because it's such a physical experience. So there's not much, because what I would say is, well, not much is really going on, but that's the whole point. You create space so nothing can go on, which means that whatever needs to surface is just going to come up on its own. It's like watching a flower come up through the ground. It's going to come up slowly. It's going to take a while. It's going to do it at its own pace. It will come, but you can't force it in any way, right? So
I'm hearing you say that, let people feel what they're feeling, and it can be proven to us that we can withstand an emotion too.
yeah.
So working with clients in this way, I imagine there's a lot of energy exchanged, or you're witness to a lot of energy expelled.
Right.
How do you maintain your container or your boundaries? Do you have physical practices or routines, like a daily routine that keeps you healthy and not coming from a place of depletion?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a very, very big topic, but so there's a couple of things. It's a one-way conversation. Like I'm just me. I don't share about my life, or I don't share about my experiences. Like what we did in Mexico was different, because there I chose to be an open book, meaning I talked about my life, I talked about my struggles, and but with a client you don't. You will, at the end of the working relationship, you will start sharing of yourself, because it deflates the transference. Meaning, if you have an issue and you come into my office and you feel that you and I are completely equal, then you would also say, well, if he's the same as me, then why would he know what to do with me? And you will leave, because you lose the trust in the process. So we keep we keep ourselves like I am me, but I don't share about myself. So from that perspective, whatever comes at me, I'm not emotionally attached to it the same way I would if you and I were having a conversation back and forth, and it was like sharing of our lives, right? It's a different setup. So that's the one thing. The other thing about it is I have a supervisor that I see every 2 weeks, and I just talk over, and the only place I'll share about my practice is with the supervisor about what's going on, and how I'm relating and how am I feeling about it, because I'm affected by some of the stories that come in, and I meditate every day. I have a very strict practice, and I live a very, very simple life, so to speak, because I see about 27 clients a week, and I have to, I just have, the rest of the time, I just kind of have to just be with myself, and that's kind of been my way of doing it. So,
well, and I feel like a walking example of somebody who has walked through the fire and opened up on the other side with such an open heart, because
Right.
that is definitely what I took away from being with you, is that
Right.
if you commit to examining some of these stories and let yourself feel it and let yourself move through it, then, as you said, life can be so much bigger and brighter, because really you're just committing to living from your heart. But before we let you go, we had a couple of listener questions, and they were around communication. And
Right.
so I'm curious, if we know something about ourselves, if we realize that, okay, what am I really upset about? What is this reminding me of?
Mm-hmm.
How is the best way to communicate that to our partner?
And I would say, ask yourself, what do you need? So if you're in a spot with somebody and you're kind of going at it, then pause for a second and just ask yourself, what is it that you actually need? And in most cases, you'll be very surprised about the answer is not what's going on right now. It's not the dishes. It's not the child pickup. It's something entirely different. It's like I need something different. And if you can then articulate that out, then you know then you might have a different outcome. And then obviously, if you're already in the red zone, take some time. I mean, separate for a little bit, like 10 minutes, take a walk, whatever, go and do something, separate, calm down a little bit, because you're in a fight or flight state, right? You're in a stressed out moment, so you can't really be productive there, because your body is getting ready to fight an enemy, and your partner is the enemy, right? So your body is actually going, well, let's take out the enemy, and you got to get out of that zone into something more. And you're not in your heart either. I mean, that's the thing. It's like when you're in fight or flight, it's pure survival. There's no heart in it, because there's no need for it, right? Because if you're not going to survive, then you can't use your heart for anything anyway. So let's get rid of that. Let's just survive this situation and then get back into it. Own the feelings. I mean, that's, again, it's like if you're charged up, you have to own it. Like you have to own the way you feel. It's like, and most people won't own it. I mean, it's a huge part of the practice is we call it lower self or negative self-expression. And it's like, own that, own your cruelty, own your negative intent, own your negative pleasure, like own those places. Like we all feel jealousy, or we want to compete, or you wish that what somebody else have, you want that, right? Like we all feel that at some level, or have felt it. The problem is, if you don't own it, then you have to stuff it somewhere, and you got to slap it on with something else. That's, put a layer on top of it. And it's like, own it. Go, yeah, I really want that house, because if you really own it, it turns from a competition to an inspiration. I really want a house like that. It's the same angle, it's just a different approach to it. So it's really about owning it, so.
It's such an incredible takeaway. Ask for what you need when you're in those conflicts. I've done that, and the answer is usually, I want to feel like I want to feel seen and acknowledged and loved. Like it's usually about wanting love. And it's like, what I'm hearing is we need to, again, choose love over fear.
Just think about it. If you don't own your aggression, then you don't own your passion, right? And you don't own your creativity, because aggression, if you flip aggression on top of its head, it's just creativity. If you go in and you destroy a room because you're really aggressive, you created a lot, right? You create a lot of mess, but it's very creative, right? So it's a creative energy, but it's also passion. You can't have a very vigorous sexual experience with your partner and not own your aggression. You know what I mean? You can't, because if you're not willing to rise up to the occasion, then you're not willing to rise up to the occasion. So it all interlocks, right? So that means that the people that are willing to take the fights, also have the best sexual connection, because, okay, now just channel it over here. Because again, remember, all those things, like if you were to distill all this down to one drop, it's life force. It's what put 9 billion people on the planet. And you try to restrict that, nobody has been able to ever, right? Because it's unrestrictable. There's so much power in it. Like, it's the same thing that keeps the planet in place. So you can't do anything with it. You have to live with it and express it. is your only option, because then you can direct it and you can be creative. You can create something amazing, right? So,
Amy, hasn't this been just the most incredible conversation?
Yeah, I feel like we need a whole second episode to just talk
yeah.
about depression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, sex is a big topic, because really everything we do boils down to, and I'm not talking about sex amongst two people, is our individual sexual expression, right? That's really, so that's where everything ends up on that topic. Eventually, that's where it goes to. And so that's, if you guys want to do that, I'm happy to do it again at some point, because that's really what it's all about. Like that's it, So, but.
Absolutely, to be continued. Well, okay. I am so happy that our paths crossed. I learned so much from you. I'm so honored that you would agree to be on this show. I know that you've informed a lot of people listening here today. Nicolai, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Radiant Warrior podcast. If you found it valuable, please leave us a positive review to help others find it.
And please check out the Radiant Warrior podcast on Instagram and Facebook to leave us your questions and find out where you can come and practice with us next.